one of the most difficult speeches you can ever do is the humorous speech. Because when you do a humorous speech, right away people know whether or not your speech succeeded or failed. If they laughed, it was good. Everything succeeded. If they don't laugh, bad. And that's it. If you go out there to do a humorous speech and you say, hey, here's something really funny, and you say it, and it bombs really, really bad, then you have a disaster. So if you want to do humorous speeches, go right ahead. I don't recommend it. But if you want to give a speech, and as world champion Craig Valentine says, uncover the humor in it, I want to share today some things you can do. Some things you can do to uncover the humor inside your speech. Some techniques you can use. But to go back to the main point is that you never want to say to your audience, here's something funny. Or I got a joke to tell you. Or worse yet, this'll make you laugh. Because when you say that to your audience sometimes is like, okay, go ahead, funny boy, make me laugh. And you know, no matter what you do, they ain't gonna laugh. So the first thing is, if you're going out there and you're going to do a humorous speech, don't. Tell a speech. Try to get some things that are funny in it. And try to uncover the humor as you go along. And there's some things you can use. There are things you can use really to get at humor and to make humor last longer. There's a simple technique we'll talk about how to make humor last even longer than it normally would. Because quite often people get out there and they start doing humorous stuff and they end up stepping on their own laughs. People laugh and then the person just cuts them off right then because they're afraid. What if they don't laugh long enough? What if something happens? What if... And they step on the laugh, it's called. And the whole thing dies. So it could be a big laugh, becomes a very small chuckle. You don't want to do that. We'll talk about ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. And there's a way to get a strong result. They may laugh, they may not, but they'll definitely get their attention. And that's sometimes what it's all about. Because humor is all about releasing tension. So you build people up and then you'll get them to release tension. And therefore humor can be about a lot of different things that don't seem like are that funny until they're put in a humorous way. And if you put them in a humorous way and you release tension in a humorous way, then they can be funny. Then they can be interesting. And they can pull your audience in. And remember, the great thing about humor is that it pulls your audience in. And that's what you want to do. You want to pull your audience in, get them involved with your speech. Humor is a great way to do that. Now, there's no guarantee if you use some of the things we talk about today that people are necessarily going to fall out of their chairs laughing. Or even that they'll laugh at all. But then you never promised them that they were going to laugh. Your real main goal is to simply pull them in and get them involved. And if they happen to laugh, great. If they don't, okay. But the humor possibility is there. Now, I'm not a great humorist myself. I'm working at it. I'm really working hard at it, trying to make it happen. So I want to share with you, as we explore together today, these 3 things you can do to help develop and build the humor in your next speech. Something that can be very effective in humor is the change-up. And the change-up is simply where you start talking in one way, and you establish a pattern of talking in that way, and then suddenly, and for no reason, you switch to a completely different way of talking. Now it's important for the change-up people understand that you are talking one way, and they understand you completely are talking in a different way. And the change-up can be very humorous. Now it doesn't mean every time you use the change-up it's necessarily going to work, or everyone's going to start breaking up laughing. But again, a lot of humor is giving the people an opportunity to laugh. If they happen to laugh, great. And if they don't happen to laugh, that's okay. Because remember, we never said we're telling funny stories. We never said we're telling jokes. We never even said this is a humorous talk. If you said any of those things, you're on your own. Change-up ain't going to help you. People don't laugh, you bombed. So, presuming you haven't promised your audience anything, use the change-up and see if that'll help get a little humor, a little laughter into the situation. And the change-up works really well in situations where there's a dialogue or where there's a scene. Where there's some sort of a scene where you're talking to somebody or you're taking on some sort of role as a storyteller, or the characters are talking to each other, or you're talking to a certain audience. And people understand the scene. And the change-up is where you go from talking one way to talking a different way. For instance, you could set the scene and say, this is a priest, and he's talking to the bride and groom on the day of their wedding. And there's all the bride's parents and family out there, and all the groom's parents and family out there. And the priest is talking. And the priest says, "Dearly beloved, you're gathered today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." And now that I've got your attention, do you think these 2 really should be together? I mean, hey, I don't know anything about this, but frankly, when I saw him with her, I thought, she can do much better. You know what I mean? That's a change-up. Where you start out one way, where the priest seems to be about ready to go and give the normal statements, the normal things you do at a wedding, and suddenly switches to a completely different style. In this case, from the very formal, official wedding style to the casual, informal, chatting style. And just because you tell something like this doesn't mean people are going to break out or start laughing hysterically. They might not. That's the way these things go. But a change-up gives that opportunity. And it's really, really simple to do. Just think of situations where things are supposed to be one way and they come off a different way. I gave an example of a change-up in a wedding situation. You could also have a change-up in a funeral situation, where the priest is going through and reading the funeral one way, and then suddenly switches to an entirely different way. And the reason the change-up can work sometimes is because humor comes from when we expect something and we don't quite get what we expected. And then there's a release. There's a tension build up and there's a release. And something can build up tension is where we expect something to happen next and we don't get it. So think about change-ups. Think about how you can use change-ups in telling your stories, connecting with your audience. It's a simple technique, but it's a powerful technique. So for your next speech, use a few change-ups and see what happens. See if that makes your audience laugh and enjoy your speech just that much more. If you are giving a humorous speech, one thing you should be aware of is the power of the pause. Sometimes when people give humorous speeches, they have a funny line and then they step on that line. And as a result, the laughter is much shorter than it could be. People start to laugh, let them laugh. If you have to cut something out of your program because they're laughing too long, it's much better than interrupting their laughing and saying, all right now, everybody quiet down. You're having too much fun. It's not going to go over well. People are laughing, they're having a good time, let them laugh. And adjust accordingly. And the pause isn't only important in letting people laugh. The pause also gives people a chance to think about things. And when they think about things, they can come to a definite expectation of what they expect to happen next. And then you can use the change-up even more effectively. So they laugh because they were surprised, and they think they know what's going to happen next, and then they're surprised again. This can be very, very effective in a humorous speech, or in a speech where you're working at uncovering the humor. And a master of this pause was Mark Twain. Mark Twain was a humorous writer who also went and gave speeches. And in these speeches, he'd just get up and talk. And he wrote around the late 1800s, 1880, 1890, around there. But he stood up and gave these incredible talks. Now, we, of course, don't have any recordings of those talks today, but a man named Hal Holbrook went around and decided he was going to recreate the experience of a Mark Twain talk. And he gave talks in a style similar to Mark Twain. And by all evidence, he did a really great job of imitating the type of pauses that Twain's used and the effectiveness of those pauses. So I'm now going to quote a little bit of Hal Holbrook doing Mark Twain Tonight, where he talks about reporting from horseback. And this is just paraphrasing, but it gives you the idea of the power of the pause. So Hal Holbrook, dressed as Mark Twain, is saying to the audience, I went in Hawaii with a horse, and I and the horse were trotting one day, when suddenly we came upon Hawaiian native women who were out bathing, who were out in the sea, splashing about, having a wonderful time. And I went down and I sat upon their clothes because I was afraid they might blow away. And I suggested that they come in out of the water because I was afraid the tide was starting to get a little bit high. And as I looked at these women splashing about, it was a heartwarming sight. And then I happened to look over at the horse, and I discovered that the horse was asleep. Which tells you that there is a difference between the man and the horse. You cannot rely upon a horse to gather news. And Hal Holbrook continues in this sort of a way, bringing out the Twainian pause. Now, whether or not you thought this was the most funniest thing you've ever heard, or you didn't laugh at all, think about what happened as Mark Twain gave this speech. He set up expectations of one thing, and then you had something completely different happen. And because there was such a long pause, you had a chance to think about it in your head. And when when Hal Holbrook, dressed as Mark Twain, gave this talk, the laughter would always build as people waited for the next line. And it was even louder because their expectations were completely wrong when they finally heard what that next line was. So for your next speech, remember the power of the pause in your humorous speeches. And finally, last thing I'll mention about humor for this section is to talk about the reaction. In humor, any sort of humor you're doing, quite often it's the reaction, more even sometimes than the joke itself, that gets the result, that gets people interested, that hooks people and pulls them in. So if you tell a joke, it's one thing, but if you have a strong reaction, some sort of reaction, that can actually become even funnier than the joke. So if somebody is supposedly doing something dangerous, and you're watching them do this, your reaction can help to add to the humor, can help to add to the situation behind the joke. So if you set up a joke somehow that involves something dangerous, and it's actually a humorous situation, your reaction can help add to that humor. So you might see the person doing something dangerous off in the distance and look something like, and the whole thing is told by reaction. Now, whether or not that struck you as humorous, it would depend, of course, upon the story, the situation, but developing strong reactions to things can really help. Sometimes the reaction is silence. The pause can be effective. The pause can also be a reaction. Somebody says something and you just have no reaction. Somebody could say something that's shocking or surprising. And instead of being shocked or surprised, you just have no reaction. The reactions tell the story. And the more reactions you can build into your speech, the more natural places you can find for reaction, the better your story becomes. And when you think about it, every story you tell is going to have some reaction. Quite often we focus on the person who's telling the story. We don't think about the reaction of the other person, the person who's the listener. So in dialogue, we'll have people talking back and forth. And one person will be talking and the other person will be listening. But if we really want to develop that story, we could have one person talking and the other person reacting. So one person should be saying, "This is what you're supposed to do." The other person will be saying, and the reactions tell the story. So the stronger one person urges, stronger the other person is. You don't have to say a word. The reactions tell the story. So as you're developing and growing your humor, as you're growing and developing your ability to use humor and develop humor and trying to figure out what's funny and what's not, remember the reactions. Because the reactions are going to take your humor into whole new levels. Once you discover what's funny, the way you react to what's funny on stage will add whole new levels of humor you hadn't even thought of to your speech. So when you're working on uncovering the humor in your speech, always remember the reaction. Now you have 3 simple tools you can use to develop and build and grow humor in your speech. First thing is the change-up. It's really simple. Whatever you're doing, suddenly switch and do something else. Sometimes it's called stopping on a dime, where you switch from one thing and then just do a complete 180 and suddenly you're doing something else. It's going to be really effective because you set up an expectation for what people do, and then when that expectation doesn't work and it doesn't happen, people then sometimes laugh. So you lead them down the path and suddenly you take a different way and they're so surprised that they just laugh. Because the tension and release. Laughter releases that tension that builds up. The change-up can be really, really effective. And it's a simple thing to do. You're talking in one style, suddenly switch to a completely different style. You can talk in one way and suddenly switch to an accent. And just go on like normal. Some people may think it's weird, some people may think it's funny, but it's a change-up, and it gives the opportunity for humor to happen. Second thing to consider is the pause. And remember the example from Mark Twain, in which the pause made the change-up that much more effective. The pause allowed the listeners to go down that path of what they expected to hear next. And then there was the change-up. So the pause made everyone in the audience very aware of that change. Such as when Mark Twain said that there's a difference between the man and the horse. After he talked about him watching these women bathing in the ocean and the horse going to sleep. And at that point, the audience is thinking, okay, it's going to be something about the women, it's going to be something about, you know, the bathing thing, horses really don't care for women type of thing. That's the path everybody's going down. And Mark Twain lets them go down that path by pausing. Lets their mind go down there as far as they want. And then he says something that completely different, that nobody would expect to say because it doesn't follow down that path that everyone thinks he's going to go down. And he says, you cannot depend on a horse to gather news. All of a sudden, people are pulled back into a completely different way of going. As opposed to voyeurism, looking at these women bathing as being kind of a voyeuristic thing and kind of a peekaboo, peeping Tom kind of thing. Twain is suggesting it's just another way to gather important news. Now, nobody in the audience is going to agree that that's actually news. But it's a completely different way to look at things. Completely different. And so, sometimes you get a laugh because of the change up and the pause. And then finally, always remember that a lot of the humor you get comes from the reaction. It's your reaction to whatever your story you're telling and the character's reaction in that story that you're telling that really gets people laughing or gives people an opportunity to laugh. Remember, in humor often it's just giving people an opportunity to laugh. Whether they laugh or not is up to them. But at least give them the chance to have that laughter. And you can give them that chance with a reaction. Where you have a strange, over-the-top reaction and people know, okay, this is definitely something that's exaggerated, something that's strange, something that might even be funny. It's okay to laugh at it. Always remember, the reaction, quite often, can make successful humor. Being a speaker is difficult, and being humorous in your speech is especially difficult. Remember these three things for your next speech, and see if you can uncover the humor. It's already there.